Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Fortifying Your Faith. I'm Haston Hanley, and I'm so glad you can be back with us this week as we are going to be continuing our season study, getting back to the basics. You see, if we want to fortify our faith, if we really want to strengthen and secure our faith, sometimes we have to get back to the basics. Sometimes we have to get back and relay that foundation, those fundamental things, and so that way we can seek to grow. We can seek to make sure that we have that firm foundation to truly build upon. Our first episode this season, and the first one with Scattered Abroad, we sat down and discussed the need to get back to the basics, the need to open our Bibles, and the need to re-solidify our faith. Our second episode, we discussed that simple idea of what is the Bible. If we're using it as a guide, if we're using it as a marker for our lives, then we better understand what it is. And if we don't really understand what the Bible is, then we start to lose that grasp on how to live our lives. Last time we were together, we sat down and we discussed who is God. That deep study and that deep understanding, or seeking to understand, of the nature of God, of who God is and how we can better serve Him. I want us this week, however, to ask the question, who is Jesus? Because that is a question that many times gets answered. Many times people sit down and try and discuss and go into great detail who Jesus is. But this week, I want us to sit down. I want us to seek to uncover for ourselves who is Jesus. So to begin, I want us to start at the beginning, because truthfully, there Jesus is. If we open our Bibles to Genesis chapter 1, we are quickly introduced to God. Like we discussed last time we were together, in the beginning was God. Just as plain and as simple as that is. But yet in this, we also find Jesus. In this, we also find Christ's point in creation. I want us to hold our finger in Genesis chapter 1 and go to John chapter 1. Because here John recounts where Jesus was in creation. In the beginning was the Word. And the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God, and there was nothing made that was not made by Him. That's a pretty simple statement, is it not? The Word, this one who we will identify in a moment, is the very one who created everything. Imagine that idea of God being the designer and Jesus or Christ being the builder, because that's exactly who this Word is. Verse 14 of John 1, "And the Word became flesh, and we beheld His glory, the glory of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth." When we seek to understand who Jesus is God. From the very beginning, Jesus has been there. In fact, Philippians chapter 2, Paul would tell the Philippians that let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus, who, being in the form of God, did not think it robbery to be equal with God. He didn't feel as if he was striving to obtain that. He didn't even feel as if that was something that was unattainable, but it was his. When we ask ourselves the question, who is Jesus? We must realize that for a moment, He is God. But we also must realize that He was promised. I want us to shift our mindset from thinking about Jesus not only at the point of creation, though, for this, but think about Him now coming to this earth. Because, first of all, Jesus was promised. From the very first sin, Genesis chapter 3 and verse 15, He was promised to come to this earth. He was promised to deal a fatal death blow to Satan. God said to Satan, "Thy seed, or the woman's seed, and you shall be separated." He said, "I will put enmity between thee and her seed, and he The one who would come from woman will bruise thy head, and you shall only is implied there, bruise his heel. When we stop and we think about that separation, and we can stop and think about the biology of it, we can stop and think about all of these different things, but I want us to think about this one major point, though. The seed of woman, that being the one who would be born of a woman, Isaiah 7:14, a virgin shall bring forth a son. He's going to be the one that separates man from Satan, gives that final blow to Satan. In fact, we can also look at this in terms of 1 Corinthians chapter 15, that retrospect viewpoint. Because when we begin reading in 1 Corinthians 15, beginning about verse 55, there is that sense and that reminder and that peace even that's given that there is death. But death doesn't hold sway over Christ. There is no sting of death anymore because sin is now conquered in victory. What a beautiful thing to stop and think about Jesus being that promise and that comfort. But he also died for us. Death wasn't just simply swallowed up in victory without any payment. Death was swallowed up in victory because Christ paid the ultimate price. John chapter 3, the Gospel according to John, many times we just skip straight ahead to verse 16. For God so loved the world, they gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. Sometimes we forget about what Christ had just said. Just as that serpent was raised up in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up. That reference back to Numbers chapter 22. That reference back to the fiery or the poisonous serpents. Those that had many of the children of Israel put to death. And yet, Moses was told by God, build this brazen serpent. Build this thing to where if anyone is bitten, look up to the serpent, and there they will be cleansed. There they will have hope. There they will have life. Jesus said, just as that was raised up, so must the Son of Man be lifted up. Do we understand that Jesus, a man who has proven to exist, a man who has been proven to die, that he died for us? He didn't have to, but he chose to. We can look at many other passages. Isaiah 53, verses 10 through 12, talks about the death of Christ. In fact, Isaiah 53 gives us that viewpoint at the life of Christ, just kind of condensed. But in that, I want us to look at the end of it, that by his sacrifice, by his blood, by his death, the righteous servant shall justify many. Because of Christ's death, you and I have hope. Because of Christ's death, you and I have a faith that we can build. Because of Christ's death, we have hope. Next week, we're going to sit down and we're going to discuss the divisions of the Bible. We're going to sit down and discuss what part we live under. We're going to be discussing all of these different things. But before we get to next episode, I want us to remember this simple idea that Jesus died for you and for me and has given us his word by which we should and we must live to have that home in heaven. Are you living it? Do you know what to do to become a Christian? Are you a Christian? Because if you're not, why not? This week, why not stop and sit down and read about the life of Christ, read about his teachings, and see how we ourselves are reflecting that? But until next time, let's continue studying, let's continue growing, so that we can all fortify our faith.